So you're at a particular stage right now, and that stage would involve a particular worldview and the behaviors that go along with that. So the perceptions and behaviors. But it's not enough because you haven't mastered the whole world and you're making mistakes all the time. And then there's other neurological mechanisms that, so maybe that's a more left hemisphere phenomenon, the instantiation of that identity. Then there's right hemisphere mechanisms that are tracking your errors and sort of and keeping track of them. And the errors are an indication that your theory is incomplete. So the errors accumulate and the information around the errors accumulate, and another identity starts to become formulated, and it solves all the problems your previous identity did, but also some additional ones. When you have an aha moment like that, it's the manifestation of that next identity that's making itself known. It's you know, because it's being built from the bottom up. It isn't explicit yet. And then you'll encounter an explicit statement. You mentioned a couple there, and they map onto that. And that's the aha. It's like, oh yes, that's what ties together these things that I've been wrestling with in the back of my mind. You know, let's say I was dealing with a client, and maybe that was somebody who, say a man, 35 years old, he still lived at home. So he was too dependent. His room was a complete bloody catastrophe. And, you know, he's living like a bratty 13-year-old. And that gets pretty ugly by the time you're 35. You know, and he knew it, and I'm sure his mother knew it, although obviously she put up with it, which was probably her mistake, at least in part. But maybe we decide, well, you know, let's start by cleaning your room. And so as a cognitive behavioral psychologist, you engage in a process called collaborative empiricism. And that's partly to solve the problem that you described. Is, well, how do we know we set the right goal? Well, we say, well, go try it. And just watch yourself like you don't know who you are, and come back next week and we'll see how you did. And maybe, I remember this one client, he came back and he said, you know, I went and got the vacuum cleaner from the closet, which is something I really never done. And I put that vacuum cleaner in the doorway of my bedroom, crossways, so it blocked the doorway, and then I just walked over it for a whole week. And like, he was completely nonplussed at his own intransigence. And look what he did, eh? He was so resentful and so angry that he, instead of vacuuming his damn bedroom like he planned, he just stuck the vacuum in his own way and then martyred himself over it every day for a week. It's like, okay then, we're starting to get somewhere with the whole you living at home thing here. And so, well, that was too high a goal for him. And you say, well, how do you know that? It's like, well, he didn't do it, did he? So then what you do practically is you say, well, how about you bring that vacuum cleaner into your room this week, and that's your whole assignment. And just watch what happens when you bring it in. Watch the fantasies that flicker in the back of your mind as you live out your resentment at your therapist, daring to make you bring that vacuum across the threshold of your bedroom. And so if people catch those fantasies, whew, that's quite the bloody night and quite the revelation to themselves, I can tell you, because you have to be one angry person to put a vacuum cleaner in your doorway and walk over it every day for a week. And so then we get somewhere. It's like, okay, now we're getting to the bottom of things, you know. But maybe the next week he'd come back, well, with the fantasies at hand and rather shocked as a consequence, but the vacuum cleaner was then in his room. And so he broke the threshold there, you know, and then maybe we'd have to, maybe all he could do was sort out a drawer or half a drawer, something like that. So what you do is, you know, you pick a target that you think is probably reasonable, and you can negotiate that with yourself.
We were sitting in the first row of the plane, and do you remember the guy was a young black man, he sort of ran onto the plane. He was wearing a yellow vest. He was a worker working the bridge or something. And he came up to you and he said, I'm not supposed to be on the plane right now. I'm not supposed to say anything, but you helped me turn my life around. I got this job because of you. And what I remember more than anything else is he had this huge smile on his face. But it wasn't because you told him to go out there and be happy. It was because you told him to go out there and fix some stuff. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about right now.
Those experiences are so life-sustaining It's so remarkable to have that happen, and that's something I've been immensely privileged to constantly experience, although there's also something about it that's extremely painful. You know, the magnitude of that joy is sort of proportional to the obstacles it had to overcome while it was attempting to manifest itself. You know, and one of the things I'm sure you saw on the tour, and I don't know how this affected you, was the depth of hunger for encouragement that exists everywhere, as far as I can tell. And everyone wants to be appreciated when they bring their best to the table. That's why the current assault on merit is so unbelievably brutal, because it will deny everyone the right to be appreciated for being their best. And you might ask, well, when does the best become your enemy? And that's easy. It's when you flee from it.
When I talk to people about doing the future authoring program, they often put it off. And it's not surprising because it's hard. But it's more than that. They think, well, I don't know how to write. I'm going to do a bad job. I don't really like assignments. I'm going to have to do it perfectly. I need to wait till I have enough time. And like one of those is enough to stop you cold, and all 5 of them, you're just done. And so I tell people, do it haphazardly, a tiny bit at a time, and badly. Because you can do that. I tell my students when they're doing their theses, master's thesis, write a really bad first draft. And then we have a little conversation about that, because they don't think I mean that. Because it sounds like a cliche in some sense. It's not a cliche. It's not a cliche at all. It means you're a terrible writer, but if someone put a gun to your head and said, you have to have your 100-page thesis done by next Monday, or I'll shoot you, but I don't care how terrible it is, you would sit down and write it. And the thing is, then you have it, right? Then you have something, and then you can fix it. You can iterate and fix it. That bad first draft, that's the most valuable thing, and so that's what you need. You need a bad first draft of yourself. And there's an idea that Jung developed about the trickster and the jester, the comedian, right? That the trickster is the precursor to the savior. That's one of the things I learned from Jung that was just, it's so unlikely. You'd never think that. It's so amazing that that might be the case. But the satirical and the ironic and the troublemaker, the comedian, the fool is the precursor to the savior. Why? Because you're a fool when you start something new. And so if you're not willing to be a fool, then you'll never start anything new. And if you never start anything new, then you won't develop. And so the willingness to be a fool is the precursor to transformation. And that's the same as humility. And so if you're going to write your destiny, you can do a bad first job. You're going to get smarter as you move forward. That's the thing, is that, so something beckons to you. That's what happens here. Maybe the star that Geppetto wished on was the wrong damn star. But at least it was a star, right? At least it was in the sky. At least it moved him forward. And so you say in your life, well, something grips you and fills you with interest. And you think, well, should I do that? And the answer is, if not that, then something. What if it's a mistake? It's a mistake. Rest assured. What do you know? You're going to stumble around, right? And what's going to happen is this. You're going to not stay in stasis. You're not going to wander around in circles. And I see people like that. They said, well, I never knew what to do, and now I'm 40. It's like, that's not so good. That's not so good. And you might say, well, and there is a literature, too, that suggests that people are a lot more unhappy when they look back on their lives about the things they didn't do than they are about the mistakes they made while they were doing things. And so that's really worth thinking about, too, because there's redemptive mistakes. And a redemptive mistake would be a mistake that you make when you go out and try to do something. You know, you think, okay, I'm going to try to do this. When you're not good at it, you make a bunch of mistakes. It's like, what's the consequence if you pay attention? Is you're not quite so stupid anymore. That's the thing, is you've been informed by the results of your errors. And so what happens is you follow the beacon, you follow the light. And you're blind, so you don't know where the light is. It's dimly apprehended only, and you're afraid to follow it. But you decide to take some stumbling steps towards it. And as you take stumbling steps towards it, you become illuminated and enlightened and informed. because of the nature of your experience, because you're pushing yourself beyond where you are, and you're going into the country that you have not yet been in, and you learn something. And so what happens then is the star moves. You move 10 feet towards it, and you think, no, that's not right. I didn't get it right. It isn't there. It's actually there. And so then you see it somewhere else, and you shift yourself slightly, and you move forward. And that's what happens, is that you continue as you change. The thing that guides you forward moves, right? It's like God in the desert in Egypt, the pillar of light that you're following. It's moving. It's not a permanent thing. You move towards it, it moves away. It guides you forward. And so you say, well, is what I'm aiming at paradise itself? And the answer to that is no, because what do you know? You couldn't see paradise if it was right in front of you, but you might get a glimmer of it. And so you move towards it, and you grow. And then the next time you open your eyes, you see a little bit more clearly. And that's what happens, is that just happens over and over, right? It keeps moving. And so you move like this. But the thing that's so cool is that all those zigs and zags, you say, and each of those zags and zigs is a catastrophe. I hit a wall, my God, and then I had to die a little bit, and I barely got back up. It's a phoenix transformation at each turn, and it's painful. But the thing is that even though you've traveled 20 miles, let's say, on that road, and you've only moved 3 miles forward, you've moved 3 miles forward instead of falling backwards, because that's the thing too, is that if you stand still, you fall backwards. You cannot stand still, because the world moves away from you if you stand still. And there's no stasis, there's only backwards. And so if you're not moving forwards, then you're moving backwards. And that's more of the underlying truth of the Matthew principle. To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken. It's a warning. Do not stay in one place. Well, as you zig and zag, maybe the cataclysm of each transformation starts to lessen. There's not so much of you that has to die with every mistake. And maybe you end up oriented at least reasonably properly. And if you were sensible, that would have been your trip. But it wasn't, right? It's that. And perhaps it's a lot worse than that. Perhaps there's no shortage of backtracking. But it doesn't matter, because as you stumble forward, you illuminate and inform yourself. And perhaps that's partly because the world is made of information. And if you encounter it and tangle with it, then it informs you. And then you become informed. And then you're information. And then you're ready.
If you work 13% longer hours, you make 40% more money. It's nonlinear. So you think, why is that? Well, imagine you had 10 employees and one of them works an extra 10%. It's not much. Well, how often is that person going to be promoted, assuming you have a clue as a boss? It's like you're going to look at the 10 people and you're going to think, oh, that guy's always here like 45 minutes early. It's like, why don't we give him the promotion? Obviously, right? So these small edges that you can manage like that, work an extra 10% or extra 13%, have non-proportional payoffs. That's part of the Pareto distribution. So get your sleep cycle organized so you get up in the morning. Learn how to do it. No excuses. I'm too tired in the morning. I don't like mornings. Who cares? That's not relevant. It's like discipline yourself so you can manage it. Schedule your meals, because that's a good disciplinary routine. And then learn to use a calendar, like Google Calendar. Most of you, many of you out there, do not use a calendar. Okay, a calendar is not a prison, and it's not a tyrant. Not if you use it properly. A calendar keeps anxiety at bay. It makes sure that you do what you need to do, which is important, because otherwise you fall behind. But if you use it properly, it also helps you plan what you want to do. So I could say, well, lay out your damn calendar and design the days you would like to have. That's what your calendar is for. So you can put in all sorts of things in there you want to do, and that would be good for you. And that's a really good way to start being more industrious. Make a plan. You need a plan for 3 years. You need a plan for the next year. You need a plan for the next 6 months. You need a plan for the next 3 months. You need a plan for the week. You need a plan for the day. You need a plan for the hour. All of that. all of that. I make lists constantly of what I have to do. And they're like daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. Right now, I can't look out more than about 6 months, because my life is too complicated and chaotic. But you need a vision of who you could be, what character you could have. 3 to 5 years out, you can't go much farther than that because life is too unpredictable, I think, to make vision that's longer term than that subject to, there's too much chance associated with it to spend a lot of time on. Maybe you can stretch it to 5 years, and in rare cases, you can have a 10-year goal, but it has to be pretty low resolution. But you want plans at all those levels of resolution. You want to write the things down. And because what are you going to do? You're going to stumble around and get what you need? You're going to stumble around and be useful to other people? And it's useful to be useful to other people, They want to work with you then. They want to do things with you. They want to have you around. They trust you. They open up opportunities for you. And if you stumble around like you're blind, you're not going to get anywhere. And then you're going to suffer. And then you're going to be bitter. And then you're going to be cruel. So that's hell. That's a bad outcome. So unless you want that, don't aim for it. Or aim for the opposite, because that's how you get out of it. Make a plan, man. So when I was doing my clinical work, which I did a lot of career work with my clients, both at a beginner level, I would say, like really a beginner level, with people who had no employment whatsoever, no history of employment, who were undereducated and who lacked every skill you could possibly imagine. So these were people who were really in dire straits, up to people who were operating at the top of their profession, but who could still strategize forward. And so, for example, let's say you're at a dead end in your job. Okay, so I don't find my work meaningful. All right, so that's a problem statement. It's like, well, why not? I find the work I do repetitive and boring and without spirit. I have a bad relationship or a neutral relationship with my boss who doesn't know who I am. I have problems with coworkers. All of that needs to be differentiated, right, and analyzed in detail. So we might say, for example, let's say you believe that you're undervalued at work, and maybe you are. What you need to do is you have something to say, and we would have to figure out what it is that you have to say. But it would be some variant of, I'm bringing more value to the table than I'm being compensated for, and that's demoralizing me. And it's also not good for you, you being my boss, because if I'm actually more valuable than is being recognized, then the fact that you're not valuing me properly means that I will become demoralized, I won't work properly, and you won't get the best out of me. So it's bad for both of us. And if your boss is in principle not amenable to such a discussion, then what you should seriously consider doing is finding another job. Okay, so let's say we're going to set you up for this. Okay, this isn't like next week's enterprise, man. This is your life. So the first thing I would ask is, well, do you have your resume or CV in order? Well, I haven't typed it up for 3 years. Well, what do you think about bringing it up? Well, I'm pretty nervous about that because there's some holes in it. And, I didn't do so well in college and I'm kind of embarrassed about my resume. It's like, okay, bring it in. Let's go through it. Let's at least update it. Let's look where the holes are. Let's look at where the inadequacies are as far as you're concerned, right? This isn't my judgment. It's your judgment. Let's walk through those judgments and see if they're warranted, because maybe you're just too guilty and ashamed and self-conscious and anxious, and you're looking at your resume more critically than someone else would. And maybe there's some holes that you need to rectify. You were 2 courses away from your BA and you dropped out or something like that. Well, maybe we need 6 months to address that. And at least, even if you can't be fully educated, you could be taking some courses online. And so when you went to a new job interview and they said, what about this hole? You'd say, well, I came to terms with that 6 months ago, and in an effort to rectify it, I'm taking the following courses, and here's my plan for completion. That's a really good answer. And anyone with any sense who's interviewing will accept that as an indication that although you're not perfect, and who is, that you have a good plan and that you've thought it through. Like, that's the kind of answer that in all likelihood will cement your candidacy for the position. Okay, so now you're going to go to your boss. Well, you have to have your CV and your resume in order, and you have to be able to stand on it solidly, and which at least means that you're prepared to address the inadequacies in a credible, realistic, believable, and truthful manner. All right. Now what you do is apply for like 10 jobs. You don't have to take them, but maybe you have to go to an interview or 2 or 3 or 4. And maybe there's a bunch of opportunities out there for you that you didn't even know about. And maybe someone offers you a job. And so now you can go to your boss and say, here's the situation I'm in here at work. Here's my evaluation of the problems in relationship to me. Here's what I could do for you if you gave me a 40% raise and the opportunity to progress, but I'd like to see a plan for that. And I've been looking for other opportunities before conducting this discussion, and I have some. If your boss treats you with contempt at that point and doesn't listen, then perhaps he or she is a little more narcissistic than might be optimal, and it's time to find a new job. But this isn't something you do trivially. And so when you're doubtful, say you're trapped, you ask yourself, well, why am I trapped? And that's a hard question, right? Because some of it's your own inadequacy, a lot of it. And all of the part of it that you can deal with is your own inadequacy. So even if it's unfair, even if you're hemmed in for any number of reasons, inappropriate, like ethnically predicated oppression, let's say, or maybe you're in a workplace that really is sexist in some fundamental sense. Well, that's not good. It's not just, it's not fair, it's not meritorious, all of those things. Man, maybe you shouldn't be there. But what you can do to begin with is every bloody thing you possibly can do to put yourself in the most virtuous and powerful negotiating position possible. And you have to think like a snake in some sense to do that. You got to get the details right. You have to be prepared to bite, and you have to have your eyes on the prize, so to speak.
You need structure, you need predictability, and you need more of it than you think, just to keep you sane. Now, if you're lucky, and maybe a bit odd, you can deviate 5% from the norm, or 10% from the norm, or something like that, carefully and cautiously, as long as the rest of you is all well ordered in a normative manner. You might be able to get away with that, and you might be able to sustain it across time, and people might be able to tolerate you if you do it. Or maybe you'll get really lucky and you happen to be creative but reasonably well put together, and people will actually be happy that there's something idiosyncratic and unique about you. But even under those circumstances, mostly what you want is to have a routine that's disciplined, that's predictable, and bloody well stick to it. You're going to be way healthier and happier and saner if you do that. And then the other thing that you need, because this is one of the things the psychoanalysts got wrong, I think, is that they overestimated the degree to which sanity was a consequence of being properly structured internally, Because from the psychoanalytic point of view, you're sort of an ego, and that ego is inside you. And of course, it rests on an unconscious structure, but the purpose of psychoanalysis is to sort out that unconscious structure and the ego on top of it, and to make you a fully functioning and autonomous individual. But there's a problem with that, because the reason that you're sane as a fully functional and autonomous human being isn't because you've organized your psyche, even though that's important. The reason that you're sane, if you have a well-organized unconscious and ego, is because other people can tolerate having you around for reasonably extensive periods of time, and will cuff you across the back of the head every time you do something so stupid that people will dislike you permanently if you continue. And so what people are doing to each other all the time, just non-stop, is broadcasting sanity signals back and forth, right? It's like you smile at people if they're not only behaving properly, but behaving in a way that you would like to see them continue to behave. You frown at them if they're not, you ignore them if they're not, you shun them, you roll your eyes at them, you manifest a disgust face, you don't listen to them, you interrupt them, you won't cooperate with them, you won't compete with them. It's like you're blasting signals at other people about how to regulate their behavior so frequently, well, it just makes up all of your social interaction. That's why we face each other, and we have emotional displays on our face, and we're looking at each other's eyes, and we know as much as we can about what's going on with each other, given that we don't have immediate access to the contents of their consciousness. And so partly what you're doing with your routine is establishing yourself as a credible, reliable, trustworthy
potentially interesting human being who isn't going to do anything too erratic at any moment. And everyone else is around there tapping you into shape, making sure that that's exactly what you are. And that's how you stay sane. And so what happens to people too, if they don't have a routine and they get isolated, is they start to drift. So there's this weird dynamic that's part of the existential system of ideas between human vulnerability, social judgment, both of which are major causes of suffering, and the failure of individuals to adopt the responsibility that they know they should adopt. It isn't merely that your fate depends on whether or not you get your act together and to what degree you decide that you're going to live out your own genuine being. It isn't only your fate. It's the fate of everyone that you're networked with. And so, you know, you think, well, there's 9 billion, 7 billion people in the world. We're going to peak at about 9 billion, by the way, and then it'll decline rapidly. But 7 billion people in the world, and who are you? You're just one little dust mote among that 7 billion. And so it really doesn't matter what you do or don't do, but that's simply not the case. It's the wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network. Of course, that's even more true now that we have social media. You'll know 1,000 people, at least, over the course of your life. And they'll know 1,000 people each, and that puts you one person away from 1,000,000, and two persons away from 1,000,000,000. And so that's how you're connected. And the things you do, they're like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples move outward, and they affect things in ways that you can't fully comprehend. And it means that the things that you do and that you don't do are far more important than you think. And so if you act that way, of course, the terror of realizing that is that it actually starts to matter what you do. And you might say, well, that's better than living a meaningless existence. It's better for it to matter. But I mean, if you really ask yourself, would you be so sure if you had the choice? I can live with no responsibility whatsoever. The price I pay is that nothing matters. Or I can reverse it and everything matters. But I have to take the responsibility that's associated with that. It's not so obvious to me that people would take the meaningful path. You know, when you say, well, nihilists suffer dreadfully because there's no meaning in their life and they still suffer. Yeah, but the advantage is they have no responsibility. So that's the payoff, and I actually think that's the motivation. Say, well, I can't help being nihilistic. All my belief systems have collapsed. It's like, yeah, maybe. Maybe you've just allowed them to collapse because it's a hell of a lot easier than acting them out. And the price you pay is some meaningless suffering, but you can always whine about that and people will feel sorry for you, and you have the option of taking the pathway of the martyr, so that's a pretty good deal, all things considered, especially when the alternative is to bear your burden properly and to live forthrightly in the world. Well, what Solzhenitsyn figured out, and so many people in the 20th century, it's not just him, even though he's the best example, is that if you live a pathological life, you pathologize your society. And if enough people do that, then it's hell. Really, really. And you can read the Gulag Archipelago if you have the fortitude to do that, and you'll see exactly what hell is like. And then you can decide if that's a place you'd like to visit, or even more importantly, if it's a place you'd like to visit and take all your family and friends. Because that's what happened in the 20th century. How to think about motivation? We'll think about it from the hypothalamic perspective. So we could say one thing that motivation does is set goals. And we could say that emotions track progress towards goals. And I'm going to use that schema, even though it's not exactly right. So you say, well, motivation determines where you're going to aim. So if you're hungry, you're going to aim at something to eat. And then that will organize your perceptions so that you zero out everything that isn't relevant to that task, which is almost everything. You concentrate on those few things that are going to facilitate your movement forward. When you encounter those things, that produces positive emotion as you move through the world towards your goal, and you see that things are laying themselves out that facilitate your movement forward. Those things cause positive emotion. And if you encounter anything that gets in the way, then that produces negative emotion, and it can be like threat, because you're not supposed to encounter something that gets in the way. It can be anger, so that you move it away. It can be frustration, disappointment, grief. Those would, if you had a response that serious to an obstacle, it would probably punish the little motivated frame right out of existence. You know, so you walk downstairs and, I don't know, the contracting company has set a wrecking ball through your kitchen. It's like, That's going to be disappointing. You're not going to keep eating the peanut butter sandwich in the rubble. That little frame is going to get punished out of existence, and some new goal is going to pop up in its stead. And, you know, one of the things we're going to try to sort out is, how do you decide when you've encountered an obstacle that's so big that you should just quit and go do something else? Because that's not obvious. You know, and you can get into counterproductive persistence pretty easily. So we don't know how people solve that problem. It's a really complicated one. So anyways, we're going to work on that scenario. Your hypothalamus pops up micro goals that are directly relevant to biological survival. That produces a frame of reference. So it's not a goal, it's not a drive, and it's not a collection of behaviors. It's a little personality. And the personality has a viewpoint, it has thoughts that go along with it. It has perceptions, it has action tendencies, all of that. You can see this in addiction, most particularly. So one of the things that you find often with people who are alcoholic is they lie all the time. And that's because when they've built a little alcohol-dependent personality inside of themselves, or a big one, maybe it's 90% of their personality, and one of the things that consists of is all the rationalizations that they've used over the years to justify their addiction to themselves and to other people. And so the addiction has a personality, you know, and so when the person is off, or maybe they're addicted to meth or something like that, where, you know, the addiction is more, it's more short-term powerful, than I would say, than an alcohol addiction. They'll say anything. And the words are just tools used to get towards the goal. And if they happen to be deceptive, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're just practical tools to get towards the goal. And then when you get towards the goal and you take a nice shot of meth or something like that, you reinforce all those rationales that you used to get the drug, and then the next time you're even a better deceiver and liar. So, okay, so we're going to say motivations, one way of thinking about it is they set goals, but it's not the right way of thinking about it. They produce a whole framework of interpretation. And so we're going to think about that framework of interpretation. And then emotions emerge inside of that. So that's it. So the world is framed, motivation set goals. You could say the world has to be framed. So motivation sets that frame, goals, emotions, perceptions, and actions. And then actions track progress. So positive emotion says you're moving forward properly towards your goal. And if you encounter something you don't expect, you stop. That's anxiety. It's like, oh, we're not where we thought we were. And so we don't know what to do. So we should stop, because we don't know where we are or what we're doing. Stop, frozen. And then the more powerful negative emotions like pain, they might make you get out of there. So emotions, forward, stop, reverse. That's your emotions within that motivated frame. So, and that's another example of how your mind is embedded in your body. Your emotions are like they're offshoots of action tendencies. That's the right way to think about it, because action is everything fundamentally. So what are some basic motivations? Most of these are regulated by the hypothalamus, by the way, and that tells you just how important a control system it is. The other thing that's useful to know about the hypothalamus is that it has projections going up from it that are like tree trunks, and inhibitory projections coming down that are like grapevines. So you can kind of control your hypothalamus as long as it's not on too much. But if it's on in any serious way, it's like it wins. So partly what you do to stop yourself from falling under the dominion of your hypothalamus is to never ever be anywhere where its action is necessary, right? You don't want to go into a biker bar, because you might find yourself in a situation where panicked defensive aggression is immediately necessary. You probably don't want that. You don't want the panic, you don't want the terror, you don't want the frenzied fight, you don't want any of that. You don't want to have to run away in absolute panic. So you just don't go there. And a huge part of how we regulate our emotions is just by never going anywhere where we have to experience them. And so that has very little to do with internal inhibitory control, and everything to do with staying where you belong. The Myth of Mental Illness by Thomas Szasz, S-Z-A-S-Z. It's a classic. You should read it. If you're interested in psychology, read it. Like, it's a classic. And he basically said, most people have problems in living. They don't have psychological problems. And so I've experienced, despite my love for the psychoanalysts, very frequently what I'm doing as a therapist is helping people have a life that would work. You know, and you can parameterize that. It's like, what do you need? How about some friends? That People kind of like that. How about an intimate relationship with someone that you can trust, that maybe has a future? That'd be good. How about a career that puts you in a dominance hierarchy somewhere, so at least you've got some possibility of rising, some possibility of stabilizing yourself, and a schedule and a routine, because no one can live without a routine. You just forget that. If you guys don't have a routine, I would recommend, like, you get one going, because you cannot be mentally healthy without a routine. You need to pick a time to get up, whatever time you want, but pick one and stick to it, because otherwise you dysregulate your circadian rhythms and they regulate your mood. And eat something in the morning. I've had lots of clients who've had anxiety disorders. I had one client who was literally starving. Very smart girl. There was very little that she liked. She kind of tried to subsist on like half a cup of rice a day. She came to me and said, I have no energy. I come home, all I want to do is watch the same movie over and over. What, like, is that weird? And I thought, well, it depends on how hard you work. You know, it's a little weird, but whatever. It's familiar. You're looking for comfort. So I did an analysis of her diet. It's like 3/4 of a cup of rice. It's like, you're starving. Eat something. You know, you'll feel better. So she modified her diet, and all her anxiety went away, and she had some energy. It's like, yeah, you got to eat. So a schedule, that's a good thing, man. Your brain will thank you for it. It will stabilize your nervous system. With a bit of a plan, that's a good thing. You need a career. You need something productive to do with your time. You need to regulate your use of drugs and alcohol, most particularly alcohol, because that does in a lot of people. You need a family, like the family you have, your parents and all that. It'd be nice if you all got along. You could work on that. That's a good thing to work on. And then, you know, you probably need children at some point. And that's life. That's what life is. And if you're missing, you know, you may have a good reason to not be operating on one of those dimensions. It's not mandatory. But I can tell you that if you're not operating reasonably well on 4, I think I mentioned 6, if you're not operating reasonably well on at least 3 of them, there's no way you're going to be psychologically thriving. And that's more pragmatic in some sense than psychological, right? Human beings have a nature. There's things we need. And if we have them, well, that's good. And if we don't have them, well, then we feel the lack. And so behaviorists, behavioral psychologists concentrate a lot more on that sort of thing. You know, it's practical. It's like strategizing. Make a career plan. Figure out how to negotiate, because that's bloody important. Figure out how to say what you need. Figure out how to tell the truth to people. Figure out how to listen to your partner in particular, because if you listen to them, they will actually tell you what they want. And sometimes you can give it to them, and maybe they'll return the favor. And if you practice that for like 15 years, well, then maybe you're constantly giving each other what you want. Well, hooray, that would be good. And then there's 2 of you under most circumstances, and it's better to have 2 brains than 1, because people think differently because of their temperament mostly. And so the negotiation is where the wisdom arises, and it's part of the transformation, the psychological transformation that's attendant on an intimate relationship, and one of the fundamental purposes of a long-term intimate relationship.
There's a study I read about stress, and it was saying that stress has a placebo effect attached to it, because the placebo effect is extremely powerful. So they found some of the most stressed people in the world, and they split them into 2 groups. And they're all equally stressed. They all have a bunch of cortisol in their blood. Yeah. The people who believed that stress was bad for you and that stress can hurt you, and they believed those media articles, were dying earlier. They were having heart attacks and having stress-related illnesses. The people who believed the opposite, who just said, stress is part of being successful. I like stress. When I feel stressed, I do my best. It makes me anxious. It turns my brain on. I like being stressed. Lived longer than average. Yeah. The point is, the same drug, how you look at it and how your body anticipates it, how you feel about it, affects the real world result. I say this all the time. I say the best things that ever happened to me are the worst things that ever happened to me. All the trauma and I've been through in my life are the best things that ever happened to me, because as a man, if you've not had a difficult life, you cannot be good at being a man. Being a good man and being good at being a man, they're 2 slightly different things. But to be good at being a man, you need to have been through so much shit that when the Matrix deletes your entire life from the internet and starts lying about you at mass, and people start doing protests wanting you fucking hung, and they're looking for your family members, and reporters start calling every ex-girlfriend you've ever had, trying to convince them and bribe them to lie, to come out and say you're something you're not, when they're genuinely out to put you in jail, that you can sit there and be focused and stoic enough to go, you know what? Okay, what's the chessboard? What's going to happen? Who's trying to shoot me right now? Nobody. Okay, so it's better than it was a couple years ago. Okay, so X, Y, Z, and plan through it, right? You're never going to be capable as a man if you've not had trauma. The best men ever have had trauma. If you call a police officer, you need a brave police officer. He ain't going to be brave unless he's been through. He's not going to be brave unless he's been through shit. So we also, as a society, sit and look at men and go, we want, well, there's two kinds of society. There's the Matrix society, but the true society, the true women with a brain. They actually, I want a man who's strong, who's supportive, who's intelligent, who financially provides, etc. Then you're going to want a man to some degree who's been through some shit.
Yeah.
And a man who's internalized it and used it as a weapon. And this is what I say to people. People email me their long lists of all the bad things that happened to them, and I reply, fantastic. You are so lucky. You have all the building blocks to become the exact kind of man you want to be. If none of this shit happened to you, when something else bad happens to you later, you wouldn't be able to deal with it. Fantastic. And he goes, no, but you know, this. He replied again with more excuses. Say, why are you making excuses? I just told you what happened to you is a good thing. You need to reframe your mind. Bad things happened to Batman. They killed his parents. Do you understand? That's why he's Batman. You've just told me you have the building blocks to become you might become top G when I retire. Fantastic. What are you complaining about? He goes, well, what do I do? I said, you need to work. Take all that trauma. If you're truly heartbroken, my friend, and we've all been there as men, if you're truly heartbroken, you can't sleep. That means you're going to get in fantastic shape. You better hit the gym. You have nothing else to do. Stop watching YouTube. Stop emailing me. I want pictures of you in the gym. Get to fucking work. Heartbreak's a fantastic motivator, as is depression, as is sadness. Great. Look at what's pissing you off and make sure it never happens again. If you were jacked and rich as she probably wouldn't have left your ass. So get your shit together. I don't think motivation is a real thing. I don't believe in motivation as a concept. I think discipline is real, and I also think discontentment is real. And I don't think it's possible for anybody to stay in a scenario where they're truly uncomfortable. If you fall asleep on your arm and your arm really starts to hurt, even in the deepest sleep, you're going to wake up and move your arm. If you sit there and your life has been in a rut for 7 years, you are semi-comfortable in that rut. Sure, there's days you're pissed off. Sure, you're semi-annoyed by it. But there's also days where you just play video games, eat pizza, and you're kind of cool with it, and it's no big deal. If you were truly unhappy and uncomfortable and discontent with your scenario, you wouldn't be in it. So I don't believe there's anybody who's truly, when I was broke, I couldn't sleep. Yeah. I'm not saying that, please understand me. When I was broke, I couldn't sleep. I'd be trying to go to bed thinking, how the fuck these people have Ferraris? I want a Ferrari. I couldn't sleep.
If I had to open a coffee shop, if I sit in a coffee shop, right? If I sit in Starbucks, the whole time I'm in there, not only am I thinking about how they got the money from me and how much I spent, I'm thinking about how I could outcompete them. I'd sit there and go, okay, cool. I'm in Starbucks. I spent £5.68. I got a latte and I got a donut, and I'm sitting here. And that business place, that commercial property right across the street is available for lease. How could I outcompete this coffee shop which just took my money? What's the profit margin on this £5.68? How much did this cost them? The coffee, pennies. Donut, 30p maybe, right? How much is the staff? They pay the staff minimum wage £8 an hour. So I've already paid 30 minutes work from that brokey. The wage, she's there for another 30 minutes for free, right? How much is the rent? How much is the business rates? If I had to open up there, how would I attract people to come into my shop as opposed to their shop? They got a big brand name. I'm brand new. Okay, well, the working here is ugly. My one's going to be hot. Boom, that's the beginning. Next thing, do they have any signage outside? No, I'm going to try and put some signage outside. Do they have parking? No, I need parking. But you need to start thinking about how you can convince people to give you their money as opposed to giving it to the places they already give it.
Different analytics.
And once you do that, people say, I can't think of how to make money. If you start doing that for a year and just keep a notepad, you'll have 100 ideas of how to make money. You'll sit there and go, there's a place here that's doing this, and we could do it better this way. This place online is doing this, we can do it better this way. And then to get them all done, what do you need? Network. You need people. It's all about people. Then you need to either go in the war room if you want to join, or have your people around you and say, okay, we can make money with this. Who's going to do it? Who's not lazy? Who's getting up at 4 a.m. tomorrow? Boom, let's get it done. So there's unlimited ways to make money, but most people go through life and their money is taken from them, and they don't even identify how they got tricked out of it.
They're just happy with it.
Yeah, they just have. How did I spend 16 grand in Cirque last night? Oh, because my ass got drunk. How'd they get me drunk? Well, because the guy, when I first bought the first bottle of champagne, was there on the table, pouring, putting it in my hand, got me drunk, then I spent 16 grand on bottles. That's how they got my money. So if I open a club, I had to make sure when people first come in, they get hammered. Nobody thinks about it that way. Nobody thinks, how did they get that out of me? right? Why am I spending $2,000 for dinner in Novikov? Is it the food or is it the fact that I'm in Novikov and tag myself in Novikov? You have to identify how you're getting famoosed, how you're getting finessed. That's how you do it. But most people just walk through life getting finessed left, right, and center, giving all their money up. And they're like, oh, how did that happen?
You got to learn to finesse other people.
Yeah, but it's not finessing in a negative way.
It's in a good way.
It's a good way. You have to take money from other people. That's the only way you're going to make money.
Yeah.
You have to take it. There's a pimp, and he said a really intelligent line. He said, business is just other people's money. That's all business is. I want to start a business. So you want other people's money. That's what you want. So how are they going to give it to you? You have to think about it. Nobody thinks about it. And the easiest way to think about it is to think how you're giving yours away. That's a mental model you should adopt.
Yeah.
And you'll end up with loads of business ideas. Business ideas are everywhere. It's just execution, which is difficult.
Your ability to speak freely is directly correlated to your insignificance. When nobody listens to you, you can say what you want. If you get a platform and start talking, you will learn very quickly how you're not allowed to say what you want because people are listening. You're free to talk in an empty room. You're not free to talk to millions of people who are paying attention to you. So what we have now in the West is a society which is only linked and only bound by this false idea of freedom.
So it's really difficult.
It doesn't matter what your personal circumstances are. There's always something that isn't right near you, isn't correct, isn't laid out properly, that you could just fix if you wanted to. There's no shortage of opportunities to do that. You can do that in your own mind. You can do that in your own room. You can do that in your own household, in your local community. And maybe if you get good at doing it at all those levels, then you can start to look beyond that. If you adopt an attitude that the role that you should play is to make things better wherever you are, however you can, that what would actually happen would be that things would get better wherever you are. The world shifts itself around your aim, because you're a creature that has an aim. You have to have an aim in order to do something. You're an aiming creature. You look at a point and you move towards it. It's built right into you. So that sets up the world around you. It organizes all of your perceptions. It organizes what you see and you don't see. It organizes your emotions and your motivations. So you organize yourself around that aim. And then what happens is the day manifests itself as a set of challenges and problems. And if you solve them properly, then you stay on the pathway towards that aim. And you can concentrate on the day. And so that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, because you can point into the distance, the far distance, and you can live in the day. And it seems to me that makes every moment of the day supercharged with meaning, because if everything that you're doing every day is related to the highest possible aim that you can conceptualize, well, that's the very definition of the meaning that would sustain you in your life. An uphill trajectory is actually even better than being somewhere good as far as I'm concerned, because one of the things that really makes your life meaningful is the clear realization that you're headed somewhere better than you are now. And then it's even better if you also understand that there's a direct causal relationship between the things that you're doing and the steepness of that incline. There's two modes of being in the world, right? There's one where you adopt the responsibility for living properly, for being properly, and you make the sacrifices necessary for doing that, and then everything will flourish properly. And the other one is a pathway of resentment and bitterness and rejection and genocide. If you make your life 0.1% better a week, man, in 2 or 3 years, you're in such a better place than you were that it isn't even like the same domain. And if you keep that up for 10 years or 20 years, especially if you're young and you start early, you start to straighten yourself out and fix the things that you can fix. You can transform your lives in ways that are completely unimaginable. And God only knows what the upper limit of that is in terms of human possibility. What you're actually made of, what you're made of is what you encounter when you voluntarily encounter the unknown. And so the more you voluntarily encounter the unknown, the more you get made of. And the more you get made of, the more there is to you. And then the more you're good at encountering the unknown and restructuring order and calling forth proper order out of the potential of being. And God, you got to think, why wouldn't you do that since you can do that? The fact that you're fragile is actually a precondition for your heroism, because if you weren't fragile, then there'd be nothing heroic about doing something difficult, right? Because if you couldn't be hurt or damaged or defeated or end up in failure, then where's the moral courage in the endeavor? It has to be that the fragility is built into the courage. People denigrate the opportunities that are right in front of them. And there's no reason to do that, because what's right in front of you is the majesty of being. That's what's right in front of you. It's inexhaustibly complex and full of potential, and there's no reason to assume that wherever you happen to be isn't as good a starting place as anywhere else. I know some people have terrible, terrible lives. They're in situations that are absolutely unbearable. But I also do know that even situations like that can be made a hell of a lot worse by the worst kind of attitude. That's for sure. So you really don't have an option about whether or not you're going to develop a vision for your life. You can either develop a good vision or a bad vision. That's your option. Or you can live out your vision or someone else's. There's no vision option. If you have poor vision, immature and hedonistic, that might be a good way of thinking about it, then the vision that you impose on the world is merely a consequence of your short-term whims. You're going to be governed by something. And you need to know that. And there isn't much difference between being governed by something and being possessed by something. And that's a useful thing to know too, because if you have any sense at all, you'd want to be possessed by the right thing. Because if you're possessed by the wrong thing, you're going to be in so much trouble you can hardly imagine it. And not only are you going to be in trouble, you're going to be trouble to everyone that you encounter. And that seems like a very bad plan. And it's not necessary. So it would be better to do the better thing. And so I entitled this relatively brief course, Vision and Plan, Theory and Practice. That's a repetitive title. A vision is a broad theory, and a plan is a narrow and focused vision. And so a broad vision focuses to a point that can be implemented. And so what I'm going to do with you over the next hours is describe to you how you might conceptualize a vision in the broadest possible sense, so that you understand deeply why doing so is necessary, so that you understand the consequences of doing it properly, and you understand the consequences of doing it improperly. And then we're going to take that general conceptual scheme and we're going to focus it down to the point where it becomes practically implementable, right? Because one of the things you might most want to do if you become psychologically or philosophically informed is to understand how you take that broader conceptualization and make it relevant and implementable within the confines of your own life, right? Then you have the advantages of the broader philosophical view, but also something to do that's extraordinarily practical. And I would say that abstract ideas become meaningful when they're implementable. And that's a good thing to know if you're ever talking to people and you want to motivate them. If you have a broad scale vision, maybe you're trying to organize people to engage in some endeavor, that could be your family or your business compatriots, your friends, any sort of occasion. You want to give them the general picture, but then you also want to be able to specify for them exactly what they need to do. And what they need to do is how they need to transform the way they look at the situation and how they need to reconstruct their actions. And so we're going to go from the general to the specific over the course of this discussion. So we'll start very general. I want to present you with a way of conceptualizing the world of experience in the broadest possible sense, because that'll give you the initial introduction into why developing a vision is inevitable and necessary. So this is a Taoist image of the world. And it isn't the image that people in the West are generally familiar with, because we tend to think of the world as material. But the world is not merely material, not least because the world is at least material and information is not, it's not material in a reductive sense. The classic view of the world, even in the West, was more like the Taoist view. And the Taoist view is that the world of your experience, and maybe even the world as such, is made up of two components. One you could conceptualize as chaos, and the other you could conceptualize as order. And in the yin and yang symbol, which is two serpents, by the way, head to tail, the black serpent is chaos, and the white serpent is order. And the black serpent is generally identified with the feminine, which is not the same as the female or the woman, and the white serpent is characterized as masculine. I'll describe why that is as we progress. So what does this mean, that the world is chaos and order? In its what would you say, initial differentiated conception. You could think of the world of experience as a transcendent unity, and that would be the unity of all things, and then you could think of that unity as falling into pieces. I mean, each of us is a piece of an overarching unity. You might ask, well, what is the most fundamental initial breakdown of the unity? And the answer to that is, well, it's chaos and order, and it's always that, no matter where you are. And so here's a way of understanding that. No matter where you are, there are things that are happening that you understand, and there are things that are happening that you don't understand. Okay, and the things that you understand, that's order, that's the domain of order, and the things that you don't understand, that transcend your understanding, that's the domain of chaos. And chaos is also the domain of potential, because in the things you don't understand is the possibility of new knowledge. Right? New ways of conceptualizing the world and new discoveries about your own nature. Right? And so you can be terrified of the things that you don't understand and that you don't know, and you can see why that might be, because they can undermine you. But by the same token, in the domain of things you don't understand is all the potential of the world. Right? So one of the things that you might think about deeply is what would be a good rule of thumb attitude to have towards the things you don't know. And one answer to that is to be terrified into paralysis because of the necessity for change that an encounter with the unknown might produce. And the other is to welcome it with open arms, because the you that might emerge as a consequence of confrontation with what you don't know might be much better than the you you're stuck with now. And that's very much worth considering. It's how you conceptualize the stance you take in relationship to the domains of chaos and order. That's about the most important decision you ever make. Like if you're a tyrant, for example, you're going to be allied 100% with what you already know. Right now, the price you'll pay for that is that you forego transformation. Another price you pay for that is if you're tyrannical in your alliance with what you already understand, you're going to attempt to force that on other people. Right? And part of the reason you do that is because you don't have enough faith in your own ability to confront what you don't understand and change. Right? It's not wise. Unless, well, I suppose you could envision a situation where you should only abide by what you know. And I would say, if your life is absolutely perfect in all of its manifestations and you couldn't dream of having anything better, then you can stick with what you've got. Right? But if it isn't, then there's always the possibility that a little more transformation on your part might be a good thing. There's a deep level of conceptualization that goes along with that too, which is how should you construe the domain of possibility or potential? And I suppose you might say that this is a question of faith, right? Because the future is unknown and indeterminate, it's very difficult to make any final decisions about its nature, but you can make a meta decision, you might say, that the domain of potential, if confronted properly, is positive, and that you could establish a relationship with it that would bring benefit to you, right? And that's really the attitude that children have towards the world, right? Is that they're open to exploration and discovery within certain bounds. That's often shattered, that naivety, that naive openness of children is often shattered by trauma, right? And that tends to turn us into cynics. But that doesn't mean that the attitude was
fundamentally inappropriate. There's a gospel statement that makes the claim that you can't enter the kingdom of heaven unless you become like little children, which is not the same as staying like a little child, by the way. And the idea there is that you should strive to regain the attitude of open acceptance of what's confronting you as an adult, even if you've been hurt, right? Because if you've been hurt, well, then you could imagine that you're more afraid of what you don't know because you've discovered that it can undermine and destroy you, devour you, and it's very easy to become cynical and bitter and rigid as a consequence of that. But as I said before, the price you pay for that is that you forego any further transformation and you tend to become a tyrant. And that's, well, unless you want to become a tyrant, tyrants tend to live in hell, so I wouldn't recommend it unless that's what you want. And you can be a tyrant to yourself just like you're a tyrant to other people. And in fact, that's usually a precondition for being a tyrant to other people, which is also a good reason not to be a tyrant to other people, because you will bring that attitude towards yourself. Okay, so what have we established? Well, we've established that you can think about your world of experience as bifurcated into two fundamental realms, right? There's the realm of things you don't understand. You can think about that as unexplored territory if you want to make it more biological. Animals have to deal with a territory that they have mastered and understand. That's their home territory. And they have to deal with territories where the predators lurk, let's say, and animals tend to stick to their home territory because that's explored, and they tend to be afraid of their unexplored territory because that's where they can be destroyed. And so this notion, this metaphysical notion that experience is characterized by chaos and order, is also a notion that can align with a materialistic view of the world and the psyche as a biological phenomenon. Your nervous system is set up really to respond with security when you're in the territory that you understand, and to respond with first fear and then curiosity when you encounter the territory you don't understand. Now, for animals, that territory tends to be more specifically geographical, right? Because like a wolf pack will have its territory, or any given animal will have its physical territory. Now, we inhabit a physical territory, which is why hopefully you're comfortable at home and less comfortable when you make a foray out into the world to places that you don't know. But our environment is also conceptual, right? And so our conceptual environments are also divided up into the things we understand and the things that we don't understand. And even though we can be at home in our physical territory and quite secure, in our metaphysical territories, there are still domains that we don't understand, edges and frontiers, right? And so if maybe you have some primitive understanding of physics, but you could certainly appreciate very rapidly that there are physical theories developed by sophisticated physicists that transcend your understanding. And you can imagine that there's also a place between your understanding and those more sophisticated theories where you can almost understand. And you could imagine standing on that edge of almost understanding and being curious and intrigued and enticed by the possibility that you might expand your knowledge. Well, you're surrounded by a metaphysical territory, a multidimensional metaphysical territory made of all these different domains of knowledge, and you have some mastery over each of them. There are elements of them that transcend you, and there are frontiers and borders that you could stand on where you would learn, right? Here's the thing to know. You get interested in something when you're put on the edge of what you know, right? And that grip of interest is actually a manifestation of the instinct that drives you to learn. Now, and you can see now and then that you'll encounter a book or a talk or a discussion that maximizes your engagement, and the maximization of that engagement is generally a signal that you're in the place where optimized learning is taking place. Now, people make the claim, especially in the modern world, that life is intrinsically meaningless, and that's usually a rationalist claim.
I can talk about that later, but I'm making a phenomenological claim, which is that there's an instinct of meaning that signals that you're in a place that's the border between what you know and what you don't know, that grips you, and that phenomenological meaning is a signal of transformation and of expansion, of adaptation. And in consequence, it's not something that should be eradicable by a kind of brainless nihilism. It's actually the deepest signal you have that you're in the place that you should be if you're transforming into the next best version of yourself. So you don't want to forego a relationship with that, because if you do that because you're nihilistic, let's say, and maybe because you've been hurt, then you're going to destroy your relationship with the process that could transform you and allow you to adapt to the world. That seems like a bad idea. And so it's use. People say, you know, that they can't live without meaning. And that's a very strange thing to say if you think about meaning as something that's only abstracted or metaphysical. But if you understand that meaning is actually a manifestation of the instinct that signals optimal learning or optimal transformation, then you can understand why you might die without meaning, because in some sense, if you're static, you're not living. So, and if you also understand that meaning is the signal of optimized transformation, if you really understand that, then you're immune in some ways to a corrosive, to the corrosive nihilism that says, you know, at its core, life has no meaning. It's like, I probably figured this out years ago when I was thinking about music. You know, because music has the aspect of intrinsic meaning, right? If you're listening to a piece of music that compels you or that you love, and someone taps you on the shoulder and tells you that, you know, in the final analysis, that nothing you do has any significance, if you have any sense, you're going to just push them away and say, yeah, but I'm listening to the music. And music is a balance between chaos and order, right? It has an element of predictability, otherwise you can't follow the piece of music. But it has an element of unpredictability, because if it just repeats over and over, you get bored with it very quickly. So what a musician does is present you with a structure of order and then vary that in an interesting way within a certain set of parameters, and captures your interest as a consequence. And the reason that you feel that as meaningful is because what music is doing is modeling the way the world actually works. Right? And so, and that's also extremely useful to know. You know, you hear that music is a non-representational art, but that's actually not true. It's the most representational art, because it specifies most precisely that the world is made out of order and chaos, and that meaning is the appropriate balance between the two. And so I would say, if you're conducting your life properly, so to speak, it'll have a musical element. It'll have that same kind of meaning, and that things will fall into place in a relatively musical manner. You'll see in your life that there are times when you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, and things fall into alignment, right, all around you. Temporally, they're timed well, and things seem to exist in a harmonious relationship to one another. And those are the times of your life that, well, that you would like to have more of if you could only figure out how to do it. And, well, partly what we're going to do in the next hours or so is see if we can step through understanding how you might manage that. All right, so you could say, to begin with, the world is made out of order. And what does it mean for things to be ordered? There's a very specific meaning that's useful to know about that. You're in the domain of order when your actions produce the outcomes you intended. Okay, so that's really what it means to understand something. If what you're doing produces the results that you desire, then you're somewhere you understand. You know, if you're out with your friends, hypothetically, you're there to have a good time. If you're in a conversation with them and the conversation is flowing smoothly, everyone's happy and laughing, then your emotions signal to you that the territory defined by you and your friends and your interaction is familiar and comfortable and promising. It's the same thing if you have a meal with your family and it's going well. Now, you know, maybe you have a meal with your family at a vacation and someone throws something, you know, untoward on the table, which often happens in family gatherings. Some unresolved issue, right, comes up for one reason or another, like it might habitually. That's the emergence of unexplored territory into the domain of what's predictable and positive, right? And that produces all sorts of emotional reactions, often negative, especially if it happens involuntarily, right? So that's another way of starting to understand what it means to see the world in this way. So you have what you understand, which is the domain that you inhabit when your patterns of attention and action are producing the desired outcome, and you have the domain of the unexpected, and then you have the border between them as well. Okay, so that's a good way of conceptualizing the world as such. And my proposition was that you experience the positive meaning that lightens up your life when you're standing on the border between order and chaos. That's the border of optimized transformation. Because you might say you're best situated when you're firmly in the domain of what you understand. That's what people think when they pursue security. But the problem with security is that it has no element of transformation. And so you don't only want to be where things are going the way you want them to go. You want to be where things are going the way you want them to go, but where you're changing and things are changing so that they can get better, right? So it's an edge. You're not in the domain of the predictable. You have one foot in the domain of the predictable and another foot in the domain of the unknown so that you can make more of yourself while you're sufficiently safe. You know, and that's what you do when you play, by the way. When you play, you manifest a set of skills that you've already mastered. Otherwise, you don't know how to play the game. But you want to play the game on the edge. That's why you pick a partner that in a play bout that's a challenge to you, right? Because you might think, well, if you're playing with someone, why not just pick someone that you can beat hands down 100% of the time? And your answer would be, well, that's no fun. And the question about that is, well, why is it no fun if the aim of the game is to win? Why not pick a partner that you can beat 100% of the time? Because then you win, and the answer is, in the pursuit of that narrow, certain victory, you forego the possibility of becoming a better player. Right, okay, so there's a meaning in security, which is that you can predict everything that's going to happen. And there's a meaning in the unknown, which is that you're put off your, what would you say, you're thrown off your feet and you're surprised and threatened and anxious. And then there's a meaning on the border between those where you're secure enough so that you're stable, but you're transforming enough so that you're moving towards an optimized version of yourself and the world. Okay, so what we're going to do is to detail out the processes by which you develop the vision that enables you to stand on that edge. So that's the plan. All right. Now, we live in time, right? We live in space, obviously. We inhabit our different territories, but we also live in time. And the entire expanse of time is also characterized by this relationship between the known and the unknown. Well, here's an example. You may have memories that come to visit you of past troubles, and those will come on you involuntarily, and when they do, they make you anxious. They take the foundation out from underneath your feet. And the degree to which they do that is proportionate to how serious the chasm that you encountered. It's proportionate to the depth of the chasm that you encountered in the past. If you have experiences that hurt you, that you don't understand and didn't master and could still disturb you in the future, then those visions of the past will come to haunt you. They'll haunt your nightmares, they'll haunt your daydreams, they'll destabilize you, you'll be tempted to push them away. And what that is, the reason that happens is because your psyche is set up so that if you fell into a hole once and you don't know why, you're the more instinctual parts of you are going to presume that that danger still lurks in the future and will represent those experiences to you in the hope of motivating you to develop the adaptive competence necessary so you won't fall into that hole again. One of the things you do in therapy, one of the things you do with your friends and your family members, or even with yourself, if you have some wisdom, is that if someone has a problem, you try to walk through with them why the problem emerged, which might have something to do with the vagaries of the world, because things happen to us that are accidental and random, that are difficult and dangerous, but also that our misadventures may have something to do with the improper calibration of the way that we're looking at and interacting with the world, right? And so when you're thinking about things that befell you in the past, let's say, you may have to develop a relatively sophisticated theory of the randomness of the world and come to terms with that, but you may also have to determine as precisely as you can what insufficiencies you might have brought to the situation that made you more vulnerable than you needed to be. So, for example, if you were bullied as a child, maybe you still are concerned when you go to your workplace, for example, especially if it's new, that the same pattern might recur, and you might remember with some apprehension the misadventures you had when you were young. And what that indicates is possibly that you haven't redressed the insufficiencies in your personality that led you to be the victim of repeated bullying. I'll use bullying as an example because one thing we do know is that there is some stability in the probability that a given child will be a bully or be a victim of bullies. And so I'm not trying to blame the victim of a bully for the fact that that happens. I'm just saying that if negative things have befallen you in the past, it's wisdom to determine what it is that you might be doing wrong that's opening yourself up to the possibility that those sorts of things will happen to you. And I would say if you're characterized by patterns of negative events, then it's reasonably probable that you're bringing something to the situation, right? If it happens to you once, well, it's random. And maybe if it happens to you twice, it's random. But if you have the same sort of relationship with an intimate partner 3 times, it's you, right? And that's an uncomfortable thing to realize, and you can understand why a stance like that might be criticized in relationship to blaming the victim. But look at it this way. Even if it's 5% you, maybe you should do something about it. That's a useful thing to know, by the way, if you're having difficult discussions with an intimate partner that you have now, or a family member or a friend. If you're in a situation where your interactions aren't proceeding in the manner that you would find optimal, one thing that's very much worth doing is trying to figure out what it is that you're doing wrong. It's often very difficult, right? Because if you're in a disagreement with someone, the part of you that's seeking security is going to want to insist that, look, we're having a fight here, but it's at least 95% you. And that's an easy, and anger will make you think that, and anger will also make you want to win. And, the thing is, it might be 90% the other person, although on average it's probably not. But even if it's 10% you, that's something that is under your control and you could rectify, and if you did, might stop the 90% from making itself manifest in the other person. Because you never know to what degree your imperfections are bringing about the conflicts in your life. Now, you have to be careful to meditate on that because you don't want to take yourself apart, but you can learn techniques, and we'll talk about them too, so that you don't force upon yourself the necessity of a transformation that's so rapid that it undermines you, right? If it starts to become too threatening, if the magnitude of change that you're apprehending that's necessary for yourself is too daunting, then you're biting off more than you can chew, and you should try to change slightly slower, right? And maybe you should try to change at the rate that you find optimal, right? And that's a good thing to learn about yourself, If you know that there's something that you have to do and you're not doing it,
one tactic that you can employ that's extremely useful is to shrink the task. Right? So maybe, I don't know, maybe your garage is a mess and it's been that way for 10 years, you know, and you can't get yourself in there to clean it. It's like, well, maybe you should clean up one corner in a week. Something like that, right? You can shrink the task until you'll find a step forward that you will take. Right? And maybe if you're sophisticated, you could find a step forward that you would take happily. And this is a good thing to know too when you're negotiating, say, with your wife or your husband. It's like you want them or you or the two of you to make a change. You can negotiate the change until you find a change that's small enough and interesting enough so you might both be willing to experiment with it happily. And there's a certain humility in that, right? Because one of the things I noticed as a clinician often was that if my clients were starting to make a positive change in a new direction, especially in a domain where they had had some habitual weakness, they often had to start that change at a level that was so trivial that it was embarrassing or shameful, right? And so that's where the humility comes in. There's going to be parts of your personality that are pretty immature. And the probability that you have to do something shamefully small to start improving that is extremely high. But one thing to know about that is change accelerates. And so even if you have to start slow, that doesn't mean that that isn't going to start a process that will accelerate. And so even if your first steps have to be embarrassingly tiny, that doesn't mean that you're destined to only take embarrassingly tiny steps during the entire process of necessary transformation. Carl Jung said, the fool is the precursor to the savior. And what he meant, that's why comedians are so necessary, by the way, but what he meant by that was that if you want to make a change in a positive direction, you have to allow yourself to be a fool to begin with. You're going to do things stupidly and badly when you first do them, although maybe slightly better than you had done them before, and maybe even stupidly and badly is better than pure avoidance. Right? And this is a good thing to know too when you're negotiating again with your husband or your wife. If there's something that you would want from them that you think would help you strengthen your commitment to the relationship, you can negotiate with them until you find a small change that they're willing to do voluntarily, and you can allow them to do that badly. This is a very good thing to know, especially if you're with someone you're going to be with for a long time. One of the things I used to do in my clinical practice was some relationship counseling, and one of the things I would recommend to my clients who were in a long-term relationship or married was to go on dates with their partner. And people were often very resistant to that probably because they'd tried it a number of times and been burned in some way, or they'd say things like, well, you know, I don't have to date because now I'm married. It's like, okay, you know, you don't want any romance in your life. And then they'd go out and have a date and they'd come back and tell me about how wretched and miserable it went. And then we do a little arithmetic. And so which is also always a useful thing to do in a situation like this. Let's say maybe you want to have 3 intimate interactions with your marital partner a week for 50 years. Let's say that, or 2, but let's go with 3. That's 12 a month, or about 150 a year. And over 50 years, that's 7,500 interactions, 7,500. Okay, maybe you have to do the first 200 of them badly. Right, and 200 is a lot, but it's nothing compared to 7,500. And so if you're willing to let yourself stumble forward when you're improving things that repeat, right, you allow yourself that space for play and for error, then you can learn to incrementally master in a manner that enables you to become a master over the long run. Another thing to think about that too, that it isn't so obvious when you first apprehend it, is that your life in the main is made up of things you repeat. And we tend to downplay the significance of things that we repeat because they're everyday, right? They're normal, they're drab. Coming home from work is a good example. You're going to come home from work 5 days a week. There's going to be a transition period from work that's 20 minutes. And that transition period is going to happen every day, and it's going to set the tone for the rest of the day. And so it's often the case that those transition periods are awkward for people and they don't do anything about it. And that's a huge mistake. So because 20 minutes a day. We can do the arithmetic. That's 20 minutes a day times 3. So that's 2 hours a week, let's say. It's 8 hours a month. So it's 12 work days a year, essentially. And so that's 5% of your life. That's 5% of your life. If you get 20 things like that right, you have your whole life right. And so you look at the things that repeat, right? You master them, you make incremental progress to making them as perfect as they can possibly be. You negotiate with your partner so that that occurs, and you allow that negotiation to make itself manifest imperfectly and in a manner that's ridden with errors so that you can continually correct it. And hopefully after you repeat it 100 times, you get it right. And you do that 20 times and everything in your life is set not only in order, but in the order that's on the edge of play, right? And you can do that. You have to think about, though, I see this with parents and their children, you know. You'll have someone with a 2-year-old and every bedtime's a fight. Well, you got to think that through, because parents actually only spend about 20 minutes a day in one-on-one interaction with their kids. It's a much smaller fraction of your time than you think. And if that interaction is bedtime and every night it's a misery, then what you've done is you've made that whole relationship into misery. And you think, well, it's only, you know, when I put my kid to bed. It's like, no, it's not only that, because it happens every day. And if that sets the pattern of your relationship, that it's nothing but strife and foolish conflict, then, well, how are you going to establish a good relationship with your child, and vice versa? All they are is a problem to you. And that's not a good thing. And so pay attention to the things that repeat. They're very, very important. That's your life. That people get obsessed about the exceptions, you know, vacations, the special occasions in their life. And those are often a disappointment, by the way. And that's fair enough, you know, because, well, that's because people overvalue them. And then they go have the experience and it doesn't meet their expectations. And so then they're miserable while they have it and they have nothing but regret. And part of the problem with that, part of what's causing that is that they're paying way too much attention to what's hypothetically exceptional and not nearly enough attention to what is normal and repeats, right? And that's a form of pride too, because you might want to identify with only the things in your life that are exceptional and not the boring and drab day-to-day things that you do all the time. But, you know, you could elevate those to the point of some optimized perfection. You can tell you're doing that, by the way, because you can do it in a state of play. And that's also a very good thing to know. It took me a long time to figure this out. I spent decades trying to understand what the opposite of tyrannical power was. It's not an easy thing to conceptualize, but I believe that it's play. And I think that you know if you have a situation mastered, if you can do it playfully. So imagine the situation where you're trying to put your little kid to bed, and that turns into a bout of play. Well, then you've got it, and then you do nothing but look forward to that. And that would be a good deal. If you were in a situation where you could do nothing but look forward to the things you repeat every day, that'd be a good bargain to strike with yourself. And it's also something to consider too. If you have things you're doing every day that you dread, well, one question you might ask is there something wrong with your attitude? Because maybe there is, and you should dig into that and find out. But another conclusion you might draw is maybe you're not doing the right thing. You know, and then you have to strategize carefully, and that has to do with the development of a vision about maybe you hate your job. You know, and you think, well, I have to have this job because I have to take care of my family. That's a tyrannical attitude all the way through. And you're blaming your family. So that's a real good deal for them, eh? Is they're now the shackles that keep you in slavery to a tyrannical job that you hate. That's a lovely gift to lay at the feet of your family. There's a fair bit of pleasure of martyrdom in that too. And you might say instead, and this is what you can do too if you're trying to understand the obstacles that are getting in your way as you progress, is, well, why are you stuck with this damn job? And you got to think about that in detail. Like I had clients, for example, who were stuck in miserable jobs. I'd say to them, well, let's take a look at your resume, your CV. Bring it in next week. And then they wouldn't. And then I'd have to find out why. It's like, well, why do you not want to show your CV to someone? Well, here's some reasons. You haven't updated it for 10 years. Okay, so then that's kind of daunting, right? Because it's actually like, just because it's difficult, you have to sit down and go through your life, and you have to structure that in a way that's comprehensible. But then too, the problem with the CV is you have to reveal everything about you that's embarrassing. Maybe you have to paper over various aspects of your stupidity with lies, and that undermines your confidence about the CV and about the job, say the job interview process, because you have holes in your past that you don't know what to do with. Well, you face that, you think, okay, well, you know, I had clients, for example, they had 95% of their undergraduate degree, and then they stopped. And there's a reason for that. I don't know, maybe they didn't want the responsibility that would be attendant upon completing the degree. Maybe it was a good way of getting back at their father who forced them to go into engineering when they wanted to be an artist. Like, there's some reason you stop with it 95% done, and then you have to fix that, because otherwise you're embarrassed about it, and if you're embarrassed about it, then you're not going to be confident when you go to your job interview, and if you're afraid of not being confident, you won't look for a job, and then if you won't look for a job, you'll blame your wife because you have to be tyrannized at work. That's a stupid game. And so instead of that, you might figure out, well, why the hell did you quit when you were within, you know, grasping distance of the goal? And God only knows why that is, but maybe it's something that isn't even true of you anymore. You know, maybe you outgrew whatever stupidity had made you do that 10 years ago. To put your CV together, you have to put your past together. And maybe that takes 2 years, you know. If you want to find a job you actually like, 2 years isn't too much of an investment to make. And maybe you're terrified because you're going to throw your CV out in the wind, and 49 out of 50 times it's going to be rejected. But then you could look at it actuarially and presume, well, of course that's the case, because lots of companies advertise positions that don't even exist because they want to keep a continual flow of CVs going through the system, or they advertise because they're required to legally and they already have a candidate. Or it could be that, you know, at this particular moment, you're not the best candidate for that particular, like, there are a lot of reasons why you're not going to get the job, but they're true for virtually everyone. And when you know that the base rate for CV submission failure is 95%, then you don't have to take it personally. And you can think, well, I need a new job. Okay, I have to send out, well, you ask yourself, how many bloody resumes can you stand to send out a week? And that's a serious question, right? How much disappointment can you take? I don't know, maybe you can handle 20 and maybe you can handle 5. There's going to be some individual difference in that, but you could consult yourself and find out. And maybe you're so afraid to begin with that you can only send out 1. It's like 1's a lot more than 0. And once you've done 1, well, maybe you could do 3. And once you did 3, maybe you could do 10. And you could settle on, well, I'll send out, you make a routine out of it. I'll send out 10 resumes a week for like a year. You know, and if you do that, if you've updated your CV and you're aiming at jobs that are hypothetically within your purview, and you have a good story to tell about why you would be the right candidate, and you can figure that out too. If you have a good story to tell, you're not going to be nervous about telling it, you know. So you got to ask yourself, well, why should someone hire you? And then you got to discuss that with someone, your wife or friends, and have them hammer away at you until you kind of know what you have to offer, right? And then you can go in there with a bit of confidence and you can say, well, I don't know much. I don't have any experience in this realm, but here's a bunch of things that I've done, and here's the investigations that I've made about your company, and this is why I think I'd be a good fit, and this is what I can offer to you, and I won't be a catastrophe, which is the one thing everyone hiring really wants to know. It's like, what do you think? Could we do this together? And if you have an attitude like that and you do get an interview, which you will eventually, then the probability that you'll get the job has gone up substantively. And so you don't have to stay in your damn rut, but you do have to figure out what elements of what you don't understand, that chaos and potential, are terrifying you into paralysis, right? And then you think, well, I'm terrified into paralysis by the magnitude of the job search. It's like, fair enough. You know, you may have lots of things that you have to put right. Make a list of all the things that frighten you, right? Maybe it's 15 things. Then you can rank order the list. This frightens me the least. Maybe I could try it. And if all of the things frighten you too much so you're paralyzed, break them down. You know, when I was counseling my clients to go on the job search, one of their first assignments was often just open up your CV and look at it. And like this was an actual contract, because when you're playing this game with yourself, let's say, you can't cheat. If you're terrified to go on the job search and you've motivated yourself enough so that you're willing to open your damn computer and look through your CV, don't sit down right then and start rewriting it. It's a violation of the contract, right? You're pushing yourself too hard. What you should do instead is give yourself a little pat in the back and say, you know, sad as it is, I was terrified to do this, but I did it, right? So it's time to, like, you know, if you have a child and the child does something new, you're not going to say to them, if you have any sense, why didn't you do twice as much? That's a great way to demoralize someone. You also shouldn't do that to yourself. If you've taken a step forward, you know, like, have a little recognition, and maybe you've got someone around you, if you're lucky, that you could tell what you did too, and they would be happy about it. And that's how you distinguish, by the way, between the people you should have around you and the people you shouldn't. Because if you have people around you and you tell them that you made a small step forward and they make light of it or are cynical about it or punish you for it, they might think very hard about just who it is that you're hanging around. Because you want to be with people who note your progress forward and at least don't get in the way. So, and that includes yourself, that's for sure. All right, so there may be some cleaning up of the chaos in your past you have to do, right? And you can note that. Imagine you have a goal, getting a new job, and you see that there are obstacles in your path that are preventing you from moving forward, and then you see that some of those obstacles have to do with the past. Well, so then you have to clean up the past to the point where those obstacles disappear, and then you may find some obstacles in the present, right? Maybe you don't think you're good at interviews. Well, lots of people feel that way. Well, then, yeah, practice that. That's a present problem, let's say. And although it may have its roots in the past, maybe you're not sophisticated enough to conduct yourself well in a job interview, but that's something you can learn. Write down 40 questions that you think you might be asked. Come up with an answer, not a lie, but an answer. Here's the problem with lying. Let's say you lie your way into a job. Well, then you didn't get the job. The lie got the job. And if you had to lie to get the job, probably it's not the job for you. So then your reward is that you get a job that isn't for you and that you don't deserve. Well, that's a hell of a way to start a job. You know, why don't you start a job that is for you, that you do deserve, that you could do? That'd be a lot better plan. And you might say, well, I have to get a pretty dismal job given my qualifications. It's like, you start where you are, or you start on a falsehood. And one of the things, there's this phenomena in economics called the Matthew Principle, by the way, and the Matthew Principle is, to those who have everything, more will be given. And from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. And this is a reflection of a phenomenon called the Pareto distribution. And the Pareto distribution works like this. Progress is not linear. It's geometric or exponential. Once you start accruing money, the probability that you'll accrue more starts to increase. This is why a very small percentage of the people have all the money. If you have $1 million, it's hard to make. If you have no money, it's hard to make $1. If you have $1 million, it's a lot easier to make the next million than it is to make the first million. And that continues. If you have 400 million, it's a lot easier to make $1 billion, etc. This is true, by the way, for every domain of accomplishment. Once you've recorded one album, it's much easier to record the next than it was to record the first. And the third is even easier than the second. Success builds upon itself. And so what that means, and this is a good thing to know, as I said before, even if you have to start slow, that doesn't mean you're doomed to slow. And even if you have to take a job that's beneath you, which is not a good way of conceptualizing it out, by the way, if it's actually matched to your talents, you should be grateful for it. If you do a stellar job at that job, the probability that someone will notice and push you along is extremely high. You know, this is something also that people who are bitter and hold back don't understand. I used to get undergraduates come to work with me in my lab, and I had a lot fewer positions than there were inquiring undergraduates, right? So they were high demand positions. And generally what I would do was give the undergraduate who's asking a task, a real one, you know, because I'd have some, maybe I needed them to go investigate some psychological phenomenon, make me a little report about it, a little research review, and I'd give them that obligation or opportunity. Well, if you are talking with someone who has resources that you might want access to, if they ask you to do something, that's not an obligation. That's an opportunity. And if you have the two things confused, you're doomed, right? Because if you regard the things that will move you forward as an obligation, how in the world are you going to move forward? So what would happen inevitably is that some of the undergraduates would go and do just like a stellar job, and it would be done in like 2 days. And then others would come back to me a week later and say, well, you know, all these things came up and I couldn't do it. And often the story was very plausible, you know, because they had family trouble. I don't know what the hell the problem was. It was some real problem, or maybe not, but at least it sounded like a real problem. But, you know, then I'd go ask the people who did it, who actually did the job, and they had just as many problems. They just didn't let the problem stop them from doing the job, right? And so then I would hire the undergraduates who actually did the job and not hire the undergraduates who didn't do the job. And you might say, well, that's pretty mean because those poor people had problems. It's like, well, maybe they had problems and maybe they were a problem. And one of the things I noticed was that if I pulled people into my lab who were a problem, that was a problem. And it wasn't just a problem that I had to deal with, it was a problem that often infected the entire lab and especially demoralized the people who were doing a good job, right? And so, well, if you have to start where you are and you're grateful for the opportunity and you make the proper sacrifices and you work, then anyone with any sense will notice that, and anyone you want to work for has enough sense to notice when you're doing a good job. Now, if you're in a job where you're doing a good job and no one is noticing, you should ask yourself 2 questions. Do the people that you're working for know that you're doing a good job? Because it's possible that you're doing things so efficiently that you're invisible and you're not very good at self-promotion, which is actually just communication. If you're doing a good job for people, they need to know it. And one of the times that you can inform them about that is when you go ask for a raise or a promotion. You need a little list. Here's a bunch of things I did that made your life a hell of a lot easier than it might have otherwise been, and perhaps more profitable, that you may not have even known about. And if you produce an increment of salary of this magnitude, or give me a bit more flexibility or a promotion or some other opportunity, here's a bunch of things I could do for you that would make your life even better. It's like, if you have that story and it's real and you present that to your employer and they don't go, you know, that sounds like a pretty damn good deal. Are you sure that that raise is enough? Then maybe you should decide whether or not that's not the right place for you to be working. Right? And before you do that too, you might have already wanted to get your CV in order and to have started sending it out to see what sort of market demand there is for your skills, so you can tell your employer as well that you have other offers that are pending. And then you put yourself in a pretty damn good bargaining position. Part of the reason, by the way, that women do not make as much money as men, is one of many reasons, is that they're not as good as men at promoting their own accomplishments. Right? It's part of being agreeable and higher in negative emotion. I saw this when I worked in civil service in Alberta years ago when I was a kid, 20 years old. I saw that the bureaucracy was basically run by 50-year-old women who did all the work, and all of that credit was taken by narcissists who pretended that it was them and took all the credit from the conscientious older women who were working. Right, an ugly situation. And you could lay that at the feet of the narcissists for being manipulative and psychopathic, but those women should have learned that doing a great job invisibly is not a very good strategy, right? People need to know, and that means you should be tooting your own horn constantly, because that's just annoying, but it does mean that, you know, the people for whom you're doing a good job should know you're doing it, and you should also note how much reward you need for doing a good job, right? Because if you're doing a great job and no one ever notices, maybe you're conscientious enough so that that'll be sufficiently motivating for you. But most of us would like to be rewarded for a job well done on some schedule. And that's something else you can negotiate with your wife, your husband, your kids. It's like one of you in a marriage is going to cook. Well, a little appreciation for that now and then tends to improve the quality of the meals, right? And the atmosphere around the table. And so one of the things you have to discover about yourself, and this is also part of developing a vision, is, well, what's the reward schedule that's necessary for you? And none, that's not a good reward schedule. And it's something to discover, right? Maybe someone only has to say something positive to you like once every month. Who knows? Or maybe it's twice a day. There's going to be some temperamental variability that characterizes you in that regard. You're probably going to need to be rewarded more for things that you're just trying as well, right? But this is a good thing to meditate on. You know, how much notice do you need when you're doing something good? And this is something to negotiate with your partner. When you do something for them, you can teach them to notice it, and you can also let them know what they need to say. This is something else that's useful to know. Say you're having a dispute with your wife, and she wanted you to say something other than what you said. Now, that's what she's going to let you know, first of all. I would like you to say something other than what you just said. What do you want me to say? Well, then she's going to say, well, if you loved me, you'd know. Right. Everyone laughs when I make that joke. Yeah, well, it's too vague. It's like, no, I want to know exactly what you would want me to say. Like, if I could say to you what would make you happiest, what would that be? Now you're in trouble because you have to figure that out. Right? And then you have to reveal that. And then you're going to be annoyed because you're going to say, well, that's not genuine. It's like, yeah, maybe it won't be the first 20 times. Right? But maybe the person can get good at it. And by the 50th compliment, not only will have the words right, but they'll also have the sentiment right. You know, you have to let people be stupid about how they're treating you well to begin with. The other thing you can notice too is that if your partner does do something that you really appreciated, something small and subtle, let's say, they sort of sneak something good in just to see what might happen. If you're smart enough to jump on that, and you have to not be too resentful about their existence to do this, if you're smart enough to jump on that and say, ha, I saw what you did, you know, this is how you greeted me when I came home. I got a hug, for example, instead of an immediate litany of never-ending complaints. Like, that was a very lovely way to re-enter the house. If you're this is something that's very useful with employees too and co-workers. If you see someone doing a good job and you say, hey, here's what you did, and you say it in detail, I saw that and it was good, man, you do that 100 times if you're running a restaurant, you do that to your employees. Any of the employees worth keeping, they'll be working themselves to the bone to get another reward like that. So people really like that. The Skinner behavioral psychologist, he trained animals to do anything. He trained pigeons to guide guided missiles over enemy territory by pecking on photographs. That's hard. Skinner noticed that reward was the most effective form of behavioral transformation, but it was subtle, because to reward an animal for doing something you want it to do, you have to wait around until it does the thing, and then you have to reward them, right? And so this is the same in your household. If you're watching your kids, maybe your kid by accident cleans something up one day, you know. You can notice that. You say, look, you know, maybe they're 5. That was the sort of thing an 8-year-old would do, you know. Good work, kid. Here's what you did. They'll smile like mad. And the probability that they'll do something like that again radically magnifies. And kids are very good at generalizing too, you know. So not only will they do that thing again, but they'll do things in that category again, right? And that's a fun way of interacting with people in your family, because targeted reward is a pleasure to give and also to receive. And so it's a great way of establishing harmony in your household without the scraps, the fights that might otherwise be necessary. You know, sometimes you have to settle something, and that requires dredging up all sorts of things that everyone perhaps would rather leave buried and attempting to sort through them. That's quite demanding, but targeted reward, it requires attention, but it's extremely effective, and it's very pleasant thing to engage in. All right, so there may be things in your present that you have to sort out. Maybe you have to find your damn CV on your computer. Even that can be a nightmare. You know, one of the things I saw with my particularly disorganized clients was that I'd ask them to get their CV off their computer, and then maybe they'd bring their laptop in, and the whole bloody thing was just a catastrophic mess, right? There were files everywhere. The computer hard drive was a reflection of their psyche, right? Everything was everywhere, and all that was valuable was lost. And so maybe one of the things that the first thing you have to encounter when you try to open your CV is the fact that your computer is such a bloody mess that you can't find anything. And you know, can imagine that. You can just imagine that. So someone's in a job they hate. And in order to fix that, they have to sort out their CV. And to do that, they have to find it. And to do that, they have to confront their computer, which isn't that big a drag. And it's not nothing, but it's not cancer. It's trouble. But then that's annoying and embarrassing. And so instead of doing that, they don't do it. And then they have the job they hate for 30 years. Right. Yeah. Not smart. Right. And you could also see that there's a certain humility involved in noticing that your failure to confront the mess on your computer might end your life. Right.
What I learned to do, I think, was to stop saying things that made me weak. I mean, I'm still trying to do that because I'm always feeling when I talk whether or not the words that I'm saying are either making me align or making me come apart. I think alignment is the right way of conceptualizing it, because I think if you say things that are as true as you can say them, let's say, then they come out of the depths inside of you. Because we don't know where thoughts come from. We don't know how far down into your substructure the thoughts emerge. We don't know what processes of physiological alignment are necessary for you to speak from the core of your being. We don't understand any of that. We don't even conceptualize that, but I believe that you can feel that. I decided that I would start practicing not saying things that would make me weak. And what happened was that I had to stop saying almost everything that I was saying. I would say 95% of it. It's a hell of a shock to wake up and realize that, and you might think, well, do you really want all of that to burn off? It's like, well, there's nothing left but a little husk, 5% of you. It's like, well, if that 5% is solid, then maybe that's exactly what you want to have happen. The issue is there are times in your life where you know that the thing that you're saying is not true. It's a deception. It's a lie of some sort, and you're using it to manipulate yourself or another person or the world. And you're also fully possessed of the idea that you can get away with it. Where are you once you destroy your own ideal? What's left for you? There's nowhere to go. There's no up. And when there's no up, there's a lot of down. If you destroy your own ideal, which you do with jealousy and resentment and the desire to pull down people who you would like to be, let's say, then you end up in a situation that's indistinguishable from hell. Your moral degeneration contributes in no small way to the degeneration of the entire cosmos. Stop cheating at whatever game it is that you've chosen to play. That's a good start, and that'll straighten out your life. Just exactly what are your motives? If you're not doing something important with your life, maybe you're prone to cause trouble just because you don't have anything better to do. Because at least trouble is more interesting than boring. And so if you're not doing something, if you're not pushing yourself to the limits of your capacity, then you have plenty of leftover willpower, energy, and resources to devote to causing interesting trouble. There are so many things that need doing that all you really have to do is open your eyes and look at them and then decide that you're actually going to do something about them. And you might think, well, what's within my scope of influence is so trivial that it's not worth doing. It's like, it won't stay trivial for long if you do it. Not at all, and I don't think it's trivial to begin with. I really don't believe that anything done right is trivial. And my experience in my life has been that anything I actually did paid off. It didn't pay off necessarily in the way that I expected it to pay off. That's a whole different story. But if it was genuine commitment to do something, even if it went sideways and the outcome was really something other than what I expected, the net consequence over time was nothing but good. So every new frontier that can be conquered is an advance forward, and there's no shortage of frontier because we're surrounded by the unknown. We're surrounded by our own ignorance, and that's the secret to proper being. If you're interested in life, if you're interested in proper being, and you're disinclined to produce any more suffering than necessary, then you want to know how to conduct yourself when the catastrophe comes, so that you have a reasonable possibility of moving through it. If you dare to do the most difficult thing that you can conceptualize, your life will work out better than it will if you do anything else. Well, how are you going to find out if that's true? Well, it's a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. There's no way you're going to find out whether or not that's true unless you do it. So no one can tell you either. You have to be all in this game. There is no more effective way of operating in the world than to conceptualize the highest good that you can and then strive to attain it. There's no better pathway to self-realization and the ennoblement of being than to posit the highest good that you can conceive of and commit yourself to it. You can take whatever job you have and you can make it a real nice little piece of absolute misery. Or you can act like a civilized human being and notice that no matter where you are, there's a richness and a complexity that's completely inexhaustible right at hand. And then you can take that seriously and you can say, well, I can make it a lot better if I want to. I can get along properly with my coworkers and not gossip behind their back, and I can treat my customers properly. And if an opportunity comes my way, I can take it and I can see what happens. Well, this is the development of a vision. Now, you can construe consciousness as the implementer of the vision in the broadest sense. So what we really confront as human beings isn't a deterministic world that runs like clockwork, that the past pushes forward in an algorithmic or deterministic manner. That isn't how the world works. The way the world works is that we confront a horizon of possibility that's not predictable. It's somewhat predictable the way a musical piece is predictable. So it's rule governed, but it's not predictable in a deterministic way. And it's full of possibility and potential. That's actually its nature. It's potential in its nature. And to maximize the quality of our interaction with that potential, we have to impose a vision on it and then pursue the vision. And so when you do the future authoring program, well, that's what you're trying to do, is develop a vision. So here's the first exercise. It's like, okay, here's the deal, all right? You get to have what you need and what you want. Maybe even better, you get to have what you need and want if you were treating yourself properly. So imagine, first of all, that you were treating yourself properly because you actually cared for yourself.
Okay, and say you don't.
Yeah, well, you don't.
How do you help somebody?
Well, you at least ask them to open the door to the possibility that maybe they could. So just imagine that you did. Not that you are, that you could, but that you tried. Think, okay, I'm a valuable person, maybe, and if I was treating myself like I had intrinsic value, like if you were treating yourself like you were someone you loved, so you could imagine doing this for someone you actually cared about. Because most people care about someone that isn't them.
So do you identify someone you care about?
Well, you can, yes, you can, and say, because it does tell you, it's like, well, if you're not so good at caring for yourself, imagine someone you love and then pretend that you're bringing that attitude to bear on you with all your faults and inadequacies. I'm not being casual about this. It's hard for people to do this, right? Because we know our own flaws so deeply. It's hard for us to take care of ourselves. But imagine that you should take care of yourself and that you could and that you did. Just imagine that. So that's opening up at least the door, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, well, 5 years down the road, you get to have what you want and need. What is it? And so this is a deep question. So, because the question is this: your life is going to be difficult and it's going to be marked by suffering and tragedy in all sorts of different ways. Disappointment and obstacle and betrayal and the whole panoply of human catastrophe. That's absolutely 100% definitely coming your way. Okay, so given that, and given that you want to live a life free of resentment and bitterness and premature aging and excess suffering, and that you don't want to be a burden to everyone around you, what would you have to make carrying that weight worthwhile? That's a hard question, you know. It's like, what justifies your suffering? That isn't how am I going to be happy. It's what justifies your suffering. Well, ask yourself. You get to have what you want. If you're taking care of yourself, what would it be? Okay, and so you write for 15 minutes about what your life might be like 5 years down the road if you got to have what you needed and wanted. And then we concretize it. You know, I had lots of clients and students who said, well, I don't know what to do with my life. What should I do with my life? And the first answer to that question is, that's not a very good question. Because it's like, what, do you want a one-line answer to what you should do with your life? Like, life is everything, and you want a one-line answer to everything. No. Bad question. You can imagine a desirable future, but it helps to particularize it. So one of the things you might ask is, where do people find meaning? And the answer is, well, in multiple places. Here's some places people typically find meaning. So if clients came to me and they were depressed, first of all, I'd try to find out, are you depressed? Or do you just have a terrible life, or some combination of those two? And you might ask, what's the difference? And that's a really good question. If you're depressed, you have a good life, but you're suffering. So what would it mean that you have a good life? Well, it means somewhat different things to different people, but you can kind of triangulate on it. Probably you have an intimate relationship, or at least you have the prospects of one. So at least you want one, and you believe that maybe you could have one if you don't have one. And probably if you have a good life, you have one. You have some friends. They're real friends. Right? You have some family members, children perhaps, if not children, parents and siblings, or perhaps both, grandchildren. You're nested inside a family, and your relationships with your family are desirable. You have a job or a career, and so if it's a job, well, then it's hard, and maybe you wouldn't have picked it as a vocation, but at least maybe you have good relationships with your coworkers, and you're doing something difficult, but that's actually socially productive and useful and generates an income. So that's not nothing. You're educated to the level of your intellectual capability, or you have plans to do so. You're taking care of yourself mentally and physically, and you have a strategy for dealing with the realm of signal temptation, drug and alcohol abuse and sexual misbehavior and that sort of thing. And then we've added one more recently, at least conceptually, that you've adopted a certain degree of civic responsibility, right? You're participating in the broader community in some manner. And if you're doing none of those, my life is meaningless. Are you doing any of these? No. Well, that's why it's meaningless. Those are the domains of meaning. If you're miserable and you have none of those things, the first thing to do, if you're a cognitive behavioral therapist with someone, is to say, well, how about we work on like one of these things to begin with? You know, you need some friends. You need to get out in the dating market. You need a job or a better job. You need an educational plan. Like, you don't have a life, so of course you're miserable, because without sustaining life, without sustaining meaning, life is just tragedy. And so your lot is misery. And so anyways, we ask people to go through these 8 different domains and say, okay, you can have what you want, but you have to aim at it. Sin means to miss the mark, by the way. It means to miss the target. That's what takes you away from God, is to miss the target. What target? Yeah, right. What target? Right. You got to at least know there's a target, then you got to try to hit it. You know, and maybe you don't even know where the target is, but your aim isn't good, but at least you've set up a target now, and you can practice. And so, well, if you had an intimate relationship, what would it look like? If you had some friends, how would you like those friendships to be conducted? If you had a job or a career, what could it be if you had what you wanted? In the future authoring program, which is the one we've done the most research on, so if people do this for 90 minutes badly before they go to college, it'll decrease the probability they'll drop out in the first year by 50%.
That's amazing.
And it works particularly well for people who are most likely to drop out. So a lot of psychological interventions help the good performers do even better and don't help the bad performers that much.
And why do you think it helps them more?
Well, I think the good performers already have a bit of a vision and a plan, whereas the bad performers, they're really ambivalent about what they're doing because they don't have a plan. And we'll talk more about why this is so important. If you don't have a reason to do something, and then a reason not to do it comes up, well, then you'll just not do it, because not doing things is real easy. You can just sit there and not do things all day. Doing things takes effort, and so any resistance is likely to, it pushes back against you. And so going to college, it's like, well, why is that difficult? Well, you have to get up, you have to go to your classes, you have to do the assignments, you have to do the reading, you have to write the tests, you have to believe that this path is somehow better than any other path you could be on, and there's innumerable other paths, and that it's better in some fundamental sense than just doing nothing or playing games or being purely hedonic. So there's a lot of, because it's difficult, there's a lot of obstacles. And if you don't have a reason, well, why would you overcome the obstacles? And so what happens when you do the future authoring program is two things. Is first of all, you construe yourself as the sort of person who could have a reason, right? Who could make a vision and impose it on the world.
And how do you do that?
Well, and then second, you actually develop a vision. Okay, so the first thing the program asks you to do, and it's got a biblical element to it in some fundamental sense, although that wasn't so explicit when we first developed it, but I came to realize that later. There's a statement in the Gospels. Christ says to his followers, ask and you'll receive. Knock and the door will open. Seek and you'll find. And you listen to that and you think, no way, man, it can't be that easy. Well, it's that easy. Because let's think about what wanting means. You want something. You want to find, so you'll seek. How hard are you going to seek? You know, maybe you're after the Holy Grail, right? Or you're after the gold in the dragon's lair, or the jewel in the toad's head. You're after something that's guarded by some monstrous figure. You're going to seek? How committed to that are you? And there's a total commitment in that in a fundamental way. It's like you should be humble enough to be open to learning, to radical transformation, to the probability that you're really wrong if you're not finding what you're seeking, and the willingness to sacrifice virtually everything of lesser value for that goal. Otherwise, you do not want it. You did not ask. You are not seeking. You did not knock on the door.